And I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Helena Tucker, who is a clinical psychologist, a coach, and she is very knowledgeable when it comes to mental health and menstrual cycles. So that's what I'm going to interview her on. And I'm very interested in hearing everything she has to say, especially when it comes to the female athletes who you can only imagine go through so much physically, mentally, emotionally. And I'll just give her the word. Hi, Helena.
Hi, Val. Fantastic being here. Thank you so much for having me on, talking about such important and interesting topic. Excited about our conversation today.
Thank you. So, just a little bit of an introduction. Being a woman, you're already going through emotional swings. And back in the days, and maybe in some of the communities today, those emotional swings were looked upon as there's something wrong, or you have to disregard what the woman is saying during her emotional swings, or that you shouldn't be giving any reins to the woman because you never know what mood you're going to catch her in. In fact, I actually heard that some men try to choose a judge in court that is not a woman because they say that they are not able to logically argue with her and they are unpredictable. And when I heard that, it was very hurtful, but I also realized that that's the unspoken truth in a lot of the communities. And not that I'm fighting certain beliefs, they are entitled to their beliefs, but I certainly want to bring to light a different aspect of it and actually understand biology and what's normal and what's not normal. So please tell us.
Oh gosh, just as I am hearing you say all of that, Val, it's just like hello patriarchy, right? Like here, this is a woman, and here we have all the long list of things that's not right with a woman or someone with female physiology. And these are all the reasons why female voice or opinion can be disregarded, right? So I absolutely with you. It's such a strong narrative and something, that I believe is being changed as we speak, but it's still very strong in lots of places. Excuse me. Yeah, I guess a place where we can start thinking about this and why is there this narrative of the male energy, or this is how men are, this very linear, the same every day, and that's normal. That's the right thing, right? So often that's the narrative that we hear. And then we hear the other one where a woman, and obviously we're very much generalizing here, but we're talking about the narratives that can be really challenging. Is, as a woman, we naturally change throughout our cycle, right? And often the myth is that we shouldn't change. Change is something wrong with us if we change, whether that is our mood, whether that's our level of energy, whether, at this part of the cycle, I feel more sociable and I want to be with people. This part of the cycle, you know what, I just want to put a taxi on and a blanket on and I don't want to go out, right? And that's a very normal, natural way of being for people with female physiology. So something that we might go into today is something called the infradian rhythm. And people with female physiology of reproductive age have two biological clocks, right? So we have the circadian clock. We know, about that really well. That's the sleep wake cycle that's so important to, take care of. And we know what it looks like when we are sleep deprived, when we've not slept well, when our sleep is interrupted. So the likelihood of how we feel and how we're able to engage with things the next day, or even, think about when it's a chronic kind of difficulty with our sleep, significant impact, right? So it's just kind of setting that into context. Now, when we think about people with female physiology, and I'm not using the word women because there's other people who you might not identify as women, but still are female, assigned female at birth or have female physiology, we have another really important clock. It's called the infradian rhythm, and that's the usually 28-day cycle. And a very natural part of that is that so many things change throughout that cycle. So, like I said, our energy levels, the way we want to socialize or not, the way, sometimes we might be in a part of the cycle where we are, extremely creative and really into planning. There's parts of the cycle where we kind of do the fine work and editing and refining. There's times of the cycle where it's a really good time to sit back and reflect and rest, right? So these are these really natural strengths and kind of um, resources of our cycle that we can really draw on, right? But this is really not common knowledge, sadly. This is not information that we get in our sex ed at school, or when did we hear about the infradian rhythm? Like, I've been doing this work for a really long time. It was in my 30s that I first started learning about this and applying that to my life, and kind of living in sync with my menstrual cycle. So I think that's exactly what you're talking about, this narrative of, well, the change is that if we, change the way we feel, that must mean that we're not stable, that we can't be in leadership positions, or, all of these things that you said at the beginning. And it's such a skewed way of thinking about the female physiology from, all the advantages that we can draw on to, there's something wrong with you and we need to fix it. And I guess one thing I want to add to that, why is it such a strong narrative? And get into the whole conversation about patriarchy, right?
Yeah,
We'd be here for a long time.
go
But
for
it's
it.
one of the things is around research, right? So when we look at health research, when we look at research around mental health and sports and all of that, a lot of the research is based on male participants. And until very, very recently, a lot of the research is either based on males or women who post-menopausal, because women who are in their reproductive age, there's all of these changes, and researchers were just not quite sure how do we fit that into, a research setting. So we take these people out. So a lot of the research that says this is how we exercise, this is how our brain should work, this is how, you know, this is the normal. We as women have been not part of that research. So the normal is really skewed. I guess that's the kind of context to what you were talking about, that those narratives that we often hear.
I can't agree more because as an athlete myself, I also had to research a lot of the things myself. And it
Mm,
was very sad to see when it came to mental health of the athlete. There was very little on it because I was studying sports psychology and the post retirement depression, and maybe a few pages. First of all, it's not researched. Second of all, coaches are not being educated on that. And third of all, I have not seen a coach, a male coach, not to disregard the gender, but just the understanding of what a woman is going through. I haven't met a
mm,
coach who has been specifically trained on how to manage individual menstrual cycle of the athlete. I don't say that no coaches do that. And I also agree that it's coming up now and a lot of attention is being brought to that. But when you are in a team setting, even if you are in an individual sport, I haven't seen an adjustment. And obviously, it's very hard to do an adjustment. You can't schedule a competition based on everyone's cycle. So, a lot of the times, what I've seen is that athletes and coaches would pause the menstrual cycle, which means, whether it's a birth control or whatever, with the thought that, oh, I can restart at any time when, the main thing is over, which is competition, pre Olympic season, sports career. So, how does it affect the body if we pause the menstrual cycle and then try to restart and reestablish it? And what happens to
mm.
the body when the body is no longer menstruating? What does it signal?
Mhm, mhm. Because such a good question. And I guess very much in line with what we were saying before, right? So the female body, the female cycle is seen as the problem thing that we need to get rid of in order to succeed or achieve or to perform, right? So we kind of pause it, whether it's birth control or different things. And we kind of, that's not part of our reality. Now we can kind of move forward, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
absolutely, the right question is here, like, what is the impact of that? What are the consequences when, we pause our menstrual cycle, when we don't see that as something that is really important? So what we know is that the menstrual cycle, it's talked about as the fifth vital sign, right? So we've got the blood pressure, body temperature, we've got heart rate, and the respiratory rate. So we know if any of those is, something wrong with this, seriously, something is happening and we need to be doing something about it. Now, for females, the menstruation itself is, as I said, the fifth vital sign. So a really important sign of our physical, hormonal health, emotional, mental health as well, right? So if we get rid of it, we're getting rid of something vitally important when it comes to kind of check in with, what's happening with my body, what's happening with my physical health. Now, when I was talking about, the menstrual cycle as something that we can really draw on in terms of the resources and in terms of the strengths, right? So if we use synthetic birth control, we're basically turning that off. We're not ovulating. And even if there is bleeding in between, that's not actual period. So we completely turn off that part of our body. And that in itself can cause a lot of problems. And, let me say one thing here. I think what's really important that we as women have choices. So, if I want to choose to take birth control, if I want to use that as a contraceptive, I think it's really important that we have those choices and we have those options. The other side of the coin is that a lot of the time we're not giving the information about the impact of this, right? So we go to our GP or gynecologist, we've got acne, or we're struggling with PMS. And, without a lot of other questions, the answer is, oh, here's the pill. And, just take the pill and get on with it, right? And we really um, don't hear a lot about the side effects that it can have. Examples, can really have an impact on our mood. Depression is associated with taking contraceptives, with lowering our libido, other kind of physical health problems, and obviously mental health problems. But also, we're really turning off this important part of our physiology, right? And so when I talk about the strengths and the resources that we can find in our menstrual cycle, we cut that off. So if in this part of the cycle, I have these strengths, in this part of the cycle, these are the strengths I can draw on, this is very much turned off, and we don't have access to that. And birth control then, hormonal birth control can then act as a kind of a blanket, kind of, plaster really over something where there can be difficulties. So whether it's hormonal imbalance or other difficulties, they might mask that. We might not realize that, what are the root causes? We're not getting to those. And that in itself is really a difficulty.
We sure can blame, doctors, pharmaceuticals, but there's also a level of responsibility for us, which is why so many women are screaming now, listen to what you're doing. If you just put a blind eye on it, it doesn't mean that it's no longer happening.
Mm. Gosh, absolutely. And just as you say that, I remember when I first started taking birth control, right? And what was the conversation? Probably 3 minutes. Like, oh, you want birth control? Here you go. Here's the prescription. I no conversation around like, what could be the side effects? What are other options, right? Like, why do I need the birth control? Is it for contraception, or is it for other kind of difficulties, and if those difficulties can be, addressed in different ways. So, for example, for PMS, it's so easy to be like, here's the pill. But what if PMS can be worked with, things like nutrition and exercise and psychological mental health support and self-care, right? So often those things is just this, right, the kind of easy answer. And it's really challenging, isn't it? When do we go for birth control? We're often quite young. We go to a doctor who is the person who's supposed to know, that's who we trust, right? So I really hear you about that, taking responsibility. And at the same time, we're part of a system where so many voices, when it comes to education and healthcare system, from the very kind of early age, we are part of this narrative of turning off the female physiology. That's the problem, right? So it really makes sense that we might not question it, that we might be like, oh, it's a side effect, but everyone's taken it, so it can't be that bad, right? So, and again, for some people that's their choice, and for some people that really works. And there might be people with, PMS or acne or PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, where some of the symptoms are so kind of severe and serious, where the birth control is something that's the only thing that's helped them. So again, as you were saying, we don't want to knock that, but I think what's really important, that we make decisions with all of the information. Okay, this is what it's helpful, but this is all the things that could be detrimental, right?
Right. Going back to athletes, because just like you mentioned, you go to a person who is certified to know, right? And a lot of
Mm.
athletes would rely on the coach to know, or rely on the federation to know, or rely on the physician to know, because there's so much going on that they do need the support system that would know for them. And a lot of the times I find that that system might not have their best interest in mind. And with that being said, with athletes, there is also a component of whether it's natural doping or unnatural, the one that is prohibited. And when we consider that there is birth control plus doping, I can only imagine what happens in the body. But because we don't immediately see it, it looks
Yeah.
like it's not severe. But what is actually, to your mind, happening? And I'm not sure if you've done any research on doping, probably you didn't, but what potentially can happen? Because here you have completely a disbalance in hormones, since the menstruation has been paused or stopped, plus adding additional, you know, it's not the substance, I guess, additional component to the body that is not meant to be there, but it is put
Mm.
there for achievement, for podiums, for medals, for the country.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as you're saying that, like, just the sense of pressure, right? Like, female athletes are under, we're just really feeling that as you're saying this, right? Let's pause your menstrual cycle, whether we do that with birth control or whether oftentimes it stops because of the excessive exercise and diet and all of those things. Yeah, well, just as you're saying that, just like feeling the sense of pressure female athletes are under, like, so this, like, the pressure of, achieving, the pressure of the female physiology is a problem, so we need to turn that cycle off, or, the excessive exercise, the hormonal imbalance often turning the cycle off itself, right? So looking at research in young athletes, about 40% of female athletes do not actually have a period because the hormonal imbalance, or that it's really irregular, right? So that in itself is, this hormonal imbalance, as you said, is already a difficulty. Now let's add that doping, let's add this kind of other stuff that's added on top of this. And we know that this is one of the things that causes greatest damage to the reproductive function. So, there can be lots of different substances that we can be talking about when it comes to doping, right? But let's say the anabolic androgenic steroids, right? So often these are the ones, excuse me, that cause the greatest damage to the reproductive function. So what female athletes often describe is, the impact on their function of ovaries, right? So menstrual alterations, for example, in young athletes, their period arriving really late, right? So in puberty, kind of really late onset of menstruation, we can, not having period going MIA, right? Or really irregular, inconsistent bleed, heavy periods, not having an ovulation. So all of those things are very much connected to doping. The other thing is the abnormal enlargement of the clitoris, right? So that's another thing that female athletes are reporting if they're taking, especially the anabolic androgenic steroids. So significant stuff, right? So really kind of that another layer as we're talking about the impact on the hormonal imbalance. We've talked about fertility before, right? And obviously all of this has an impact on if our hormonal health is not good, if it is imbalanced there, the likelihood is our fertility and that time or even later down the line can be impacted. So the significant and often kind of long-term impact that we're talking about here. So yeah, a significant problem really, isn't it?
Right. How do we mentally respond to a pause period or a recovering period after the pause and after any top any type of doping, if there was any, and just excessive exercise where a lot of the times women are tapping into their last resources of their body and their brain, mental capacity to process certain situations, certain emotions. How do we deal with that, and what is the first kind of bell that something is really off?
Yeah, yeah. I guess when it comes to hormonal imbalance, the time we know something is wrong is something not quite right with our period, right? So like I was saying, we're not ovulating. Our period doesn't come. It's irregular. We have, significant pain. Often we're told, well, it's just PMS or it's pain, just get on with it, right? So that's again that narrative of I need to, excuse me, get rid of it or it's not a problem. So all of those things really are a sign that there's not something not quite right and that, something needs to be done about our hormonal balance. And such a complex topic, right? So we can talk about the exercise, we can talk about food, we can talk about the mental health that's part of it. I think one of the first things that when we get to a place where our hormonal balance is off is taking stock, going to see the doctor about this. And a lot of the time, one of the things I really recommend to my clients is tuning back into the body. What does the body need, right? And we've been so conditioned, and I'm not an athlete myself. I'm a psychologist, right? But I can only imagine the conditioning around just pushing and pushing and pushing, right? That all the way to the limit of what your body can do. And I bet it's a lot of unconditioning and moving towards, okay, what does my body need? Okay, maybe I need rest. Am I going to push through that? Or am I actually going to, sleep? Am I going to take time off? Am I going to have the meal that my body really needs right? So I think there's a lot of work in changing our view of what we need and what our body needs, that normalizing we are different in different parts of our cycle. We have different biological needs, we have different psychological needs. So it's really about learning that, and menstrual cycle awareness really being the center of our well-being, whether we're thinking physical or whether we're thinking psychological. Wow.
Right. You know how we usually go back to the roots of where it all started, because originally there were there was no such thing as female athlete, because when we look back into how Olympics originated, how sports originated, it was a way for the army to have fun and for civilians to have fun observing the military perform for them. So it's an entertainment. And back in the medieval years and even earlier, it was very barbaric. So it was mostly the fights that they were watching. And then because the aggression level in male was so high that they would start, fights inside of the military. And so somehow they needed to contain that, still keeping the aggression level in men fairly high, because if the other army was attacking, they had to mobilize themselves and be able to fight and win. And so going back to that, it's totally natural for men to be an athlete. It's totally natural for them to be as a provider, as a hunter, as a warrior, as a protector, all of those things. And at some point, women wanted the same rights, gendered rights. And a lot of pushing came from female body can do the same thing as the male. And it can in a very severe condition. When it comes to surviving, female body can do a lot. Whether the female body needs to be pushed in the survival mode on a regular basis of every week or every month is questionable. Now, if we were to go back before female became athletes, and I'm a female athlete myself, so it was very interesting for me to find things like women were not meant to be warriors, but women rebelled and they wanted to be like men because of the status that men held in the society. And so women didn't want to be repressed. So going back to the pre-female athlete years, how was a woman mid-class, has family, how was she managing her day to day?
Yeah, just before answering that second part of the question, I kind of wonder, when you talked about, we are fighting for our rights, for women to then be part of, to be athletes. And I guess one of the interesting things here is that, it's the system that is, has been built for man there, right? So this system, whether we talk about the Olympic Games, or whether we talk about lots of other systems, has often been built by men for men, right? So it's kind of, we started already on a really difficult footing because, like, okay, I want to be part of this man's world, man's games, or whatever we want to call that. But already then we are like, well, that is not built, that is not set up equally, right? So to get the equal footing, we've not even started on an equal footing because it's set for, how a male physiology works, right? So I think that's an important piece to what you're talking about. Yeah. That's such a good question. And when we look back into history, or when some of these narratives have started, like, we can go all the way to ancient Egypt and find narratives around, the uterus being the problem in a female body. So if we go to some of the ancient texts, and then later on how female body was, seen, some of the things, and now it just sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that, maybe until the Victorian ages, some of those narratives were still around, was that the uterus itself was moving around the body. It was this kind of mythical, almost part of the female body. And when it was moving, that was what was causing the difficulty, which was things like, that's what hysteria was later on kind of called and diagnosed as. And, hysteria would often be diagnosed as something, the woman, not just mental health difficulty, but example would also be, not listening to her husband, or disagreeing with, how things should be done in the patriarchal society, right? So just to say this, kind of as far as we go, there's often like things that we run into that already were a difficulty in terms of how men and women were positioned. Now, to answer your question around like how, if the menstrual cycle is honored, if there was a society where women, so there was a matriarchal society, or society where there was, equality between men and women, and male body and physiology is respected and female body and physiology is respected as well, what could that have looked like? Or what did that look like if there ever was, such a culture? But I'm not aware of it. But gosh, how nice would it be to go have a look at that if we could go back in time and if there was such a thing. Um, I think one of the really helpful metaphor of thinking about that is using the seasons of the year when we think about the menstrual cycle, right? And there's a fantastic woman. She's called Alexandra Pope. She's one of the founders of the Red School, and I think it was her who kind of coined these terms of using the seasons of the year to kind of liken that to the menstrual cycle. So, example is we are menstruating, which is the inner winter. So, like outside in the winter, everything is quiet. This is the time for the nature to really rest after the year of, the whole year of working, and to kind of draw in that energy for the spring then to come. So, there we are. Kind of coming out of our menstruation when we've rested, when our body's really recuperated, and there comes the spring, and there is this sense of bit of excitement, that fresh air, that kind of looking out. There's a kind of newness, new stuff kind of happening, right? And when we think about that as a part of our menstrual cycle, and how, what would be the ideal, I guess, way of functioning, or if there was such a time, you know what our strengths and resources usually at that time of the cycle are is very, very creative, very good at planning. So I don't know what it's like for you or people who are listening when you've just come out of your menstruation, and if you've rested, if you've had the time to really have a break and maybe do some reflection, the likelihood is that there'll be this sense of like, oh, new energy. I want to plan. I want to network. I want to research. What can I get involved in? That course or this business, part of my business that I really want to focus on. And so natural creativity really comes in. We're very good at, this kind of sense of being in the sand pit as a child, kind of playing and exploring, and all of those things come really naturally. So kind of wonder what would that look like, in those times that you're talking about. Maybe making some plans, maybe kind of here I have energy to go out and do whatever it is I need to be doing. Right. So that's the spring. That would be the beginning, the follicular part of the cycle. Now, the next part would be the inner summer. That's usually our ovulation. At ovulation, our estrogen is high, our energy is really high. We're very good at socializing. We're very good at connecting with others, right? So if we think about our strengths and resources, this part of the cycle in today's world, you know, for athletes, that could be time when, that kind of real hard work and all that exercise is, that's where we're kind of flying. We're in the flow. Everything seems really easy. If we talk in business, we're very good at networking, connecting with people, doing, having conversations, being on the camera, right? Our face is more symmetrical when we're ovulating. Our voice is more interesting than, when we're ovulating than on other times. So many kind of physiological parts. Obviously more attractive and more attracted to other people. And so all of that is very much connected. So now ovulation's over, estrogen is going down. And I think what's really important parts to add here, it's not like this part of the cycle is the good one and this part of the cycle is the bad one, right? It's not like we can say about the year or the autumn and the winter is a bad time of the year because we're not productive. Nature is not productive, right? Like we don't say that, right? But it's so interesting that when it comes to our body, we say, oh, I'm not productive, I'm not sociable enough, right? But really, when we kind of go into the second part of our cycle, the luteal phase, especially in the what we would call the inner autumn of our cycle, we can be very good at kind of that hermit mode, right? I don't know if what it's like for you, but when I get into this part of my cycle, it's just like the work mode, and I'm like a lot of attention to detail and focus, and it's kind of sense of like I'm powering through stuff, right? I'm not distracted, and obviously there's lots of factors that can impact this, but a lot of the time that's kind of the energy that is around. And then we're getting back into the inner winter. And I think what's really important here is that respect of our body. So we're kind of pacing down a little bit. We've been going at this speed, and our body, as the nature is preparing for winter, our body is preparing for time when we need rest. And I think that's such a good point of what you're making about, can other people pick up, right? Like, if this is my time when I really need to rest, when I really need to look after my own needs. And I guess the cycle is so kind of genius in the fact that, if we were continually giving, if we were continually doing, it doesn't work like that, right? So the first part of the cycle is the often the giving, the doing, the outward focus. And the second part of the cycle really helps us to be more inward, to rest, because that's such an important balance for those two pieces, right? So as you were saying, whether it was then or how fantastic if this was something, a community that would work now, when I can say to my friend, you know what, I'm on my period, like, and say I have kids, can you have my kids? Right? Or can, my partner doing the cooking. And a lot of the time when I'm on my period, I'm like, I need cups of tea and lots of hugs, and can you please do the cooking? Because I don't have the energy for it.
Yeah.
Right. So
I've heard of that metaphor before, and I actually shared it with my husband. And I walked him through exactly through the stages, and I said, you can do your own thing, but you got to ask yourself, what's your goal? What are you trying to achieve through discussing a very important matter while I'm on my period? Do you want to wait another week and get a much better response and clarity from me? So I kind of walked him through, and he said, is there an app for a guy where you can enter your wife's period and you can just check on your phone, what is she in, what can I talk to her about? And I said, you know what, this is a brilliant business idea. I think a lot of guys would pay 5, 10, 15, maybe even $20, depending on how turmoily their path through the cycle is. I think that would save a lot of marriages, because I think that's something that hasn't been discussed by a lot of couples. And, it's not that a man is fighting that conversation. I don't think women don't bring it up enough and pinpoint the importance of it, because then it becomes more harmonious. Because as my husband says, he's like, the wife is the climate of the family, the climate of the house. And so if the wife is all stressed out or low energy, you got to know what's going on, because men are not being affected by the hormones, but they sure are affected by women that they live with. So they need to be up to date with what phase of the cycle they are going through as well, because I think that saves a lot of nerves for them too. And just the fact that they are understanding of that it's not something that a woman specifically doing or has a certain agenda, hidden agenda. It's just the way of nature.
So good. I love that. And I'm totally with you. There's a gap on the market, right? For guys having an app like this, or for women, who are in a relationship with another woman or someone with a menstrual cycle. And it's so true. And I think, say with my partner, and this is also something I regularly speak to my clients about. So I work with people with their menstrual cycle who might run into difficulties, especially with their mental health and going through these ups and downs and emotional roller coasters. So our partner or our family or the people around us knowing what's happening is so important. Absolutely. Right. And I guess that starts with us knowing first. So a lot of the time, I remember, I have these ups and downs. I don't know what's going on. I don't even know what I need. How can I explain that to someone else? Right. So then it really does start with us knowing our cycle, knowing what we need, and then being able to have a conversation. And how amazing would that be if this was common knowledge and if this was taught in school and we can just say, I'm on my period, or this is, I'm in my inner summer, or whatever it is. And the people around us know when we don't have to do this educating and explaining. We're not there yet. So I guess, this is what we're talking about kind of making the people around us aware. And exactly what you're saying, if I'm on my period, this might not be a thing to talk about right now. Let's talk about it in a week's time. When we plan our holidays, like time when I am on my period or right before, often it's quite a kind of time when I want to spend time by myself. I'm not very sociable, and that's really important that I have that time without people. So what kind of holiday are we going to go on, right? If we want a kind of fun, exploring, kind of connecting holiday, let's plan that around my ovulation because that's best for me, but that's best for us in our relationship, right? And
Yeah.
all of those things are impacted, like in the kind of yeah, everything basically as a part of the relationship can be impacted by where we are in our cycle and working with that rather than against it. And kind of, I know we can have a brilliant time when, we've planned this, we kind of held in mind, what happens in the cycle. And when that's aligned, when that's in flow, how fantastic for us as individuals, but how fantastic for us, in our relationships as well.
Absolutely. How long do you think, on average, based on your experience, it would take someone to reestablish their optimal cycle? If they were
Mm,
to come, let's say, during their sports career or after their sports career, they came to you and they said, Helena, I'm done with that. I want to restore myself. How long is it going to take? Because I think the expectation of the time frame is important for them to continue the work.
yeah, yeah. Good question. I think it's really complex, right? So exactly, this is what I want to know. If I'm having difficulties, I want to know, have a sense of time frame in my mind. Obviously, this is so complex because there's so many different elements that can be at play, right? So we can be talking about the whole biology, kind of being off, what's happening with my food, with my exercise, am I on a hormonal birth control or not? Am I planning to come off of it or not? Right. So say with that can take that can take good number of months for the body to adjust. Are we talking about difficulties with mental health, PMS, or even PMDD, which is kind of more extreme version of PMS? Um, so really, really individual, but we can see changes pretty quickly. So I work with people, often really high achievers, and they're not necessarily athletes. But when it comes to, adrenal fatigue or high stress, high pressure on the body and on the brain, on our all the different parts of ourselves, in just a month or a couple of months, we can definitely see significant results. So one of the courses that I'm doing is called 60-day balance reset. So in just 60 days, we can already begin to see changes. And what I'm focusing specifically is the psychological part. So if people come with PMS, PMDD, anxiety, depression, irritability, all of those things that are connected to that. So when I'm talking about that amount of time, I'm talking specifically about the psychological impact. When we talk about the biological, I don't know the research on that, to be honest with you. And I guess when we're looking at different elements, it might be helpful to have different professionals involved. So whether that's a psychologist like myself, whether that is someone who's working with you in terms of nutrition, and the physical health. So I guess what I want to say is it's complex, but results can be seen pretty quickly when it's something that we focus on.
When you just mentioned that your program is only taking 60 days, my initial thought was that an athlete who requires help with a menstrual cycle and who could potentially take the program, it can be easily done during the off season. And just like you
Mhm.
mentioned, it will have to come with a lot of changes, because once you take something so vital to your body and then place it back, and it already created these coping mechanisms that are now no longer suitable for the new body, everything will have to change. So I
Mm.
totally see how the athlete needs to see the courage to take this path, because there's going to be a lot of changes, physiological and psychological. But I also find that such a decision is also going to impact the team. If they're on the team, it's going to impact the coach. So it's such a convoluted path that is not easy to take, but it's so worth taking, because here we are pressuring female athletes to potentially exhaust themselves, maybe take some supplements that are not very good for them in order to achieve better results. But on the other hand, if we were to nurture the strength, just like you mentioned, at certain parts of the period, maybe they wouldn't even need to take all of that, because they would be able to harness what their body naturally able to produce and work with.
Mhm. Absolutely, right? And it can be really simple things, as you were saying. In the pre-menstruum, during menstruation, our body needs rest. So can we sleep more? Can, the exercise and, practice routine, can that be altered? And again, I hear you when we talk about kind of group sports and coaches not being aware of a lot of this information. Um, but absolutely, there can be tweaks that can be done while all of this is happening, where athletes are still active in their career, and just the awareness of that, just having the information, right? So as we're talking about that with the birth control, it might not be that a whole change to everything is needed, which can feel really daunting. Okay, if I make all of these changes, how will that impact my career? How will that impact, if it's a team sport, how will that impact everybody else? The massive decisions to be made, but are there kind of the everyday, every month kind of tweaks that can be done? Like, you know, um, in terms of exercise, in terms of food intake, all of those things can be, um, supporting or not supporting the hormonal health. As we're talking this, I think fantastic book. I would really want to recommend if someone's really looking into making some of those tweaks, and especially in the exercise and the nutrition areas. It's called In the Flow. I've got that here, and it's by Elisa Vitti. So you nodding there is probably a lot of people will know that. Um, but again, Elisa Vitti is brilliant at looking at the exercise, looking at food and different parts of how we can really support hormonal balance. And I think it's just really packed with some helpful information for people in your audience, in your community, that would really benefit from it.
On this brilliant note, I think we are going to wrap up. I know that this topic can be spoken about for hours, if not days, to really give it all the attention that it needs and cover every detail that people, not only female, but people need to know about. But at least today we touched upon major things that are going to sh- are going to bring to light certain things that are not being spoken about, certain things that people don't even think about because they don't have the knowledge. And the more we speak about it, the more we're able to draw attention to the topics that are important. And even if our educational system is not tapping into that just yet, um, steps like that are going to prompt such systems to
Mm.
add it to the curriculum, so to say, to add it to the discussion. So thank you so much,
Yeah.
Helena. It was a pleasure. It was so informative. It was so easy and simple for people to understand. We didn't go into too much science and language that is very foreign to people. So I think today, you know, from a fairly young age to a fairly old age, people are going to be able to digest what we spoke about.
Mm. Absolute pleasure. It's just want to say, incredible work that you're doing, Val. I think it's so important, and I've been following your work and the courses that you're doing, and it's just such important topic. So thank you so much for asking me to come and talk about the menstrual cycle. And I'm really hearing how, what you're doing, and this is really changing narratives. This is really changing, important parts of how people think about their identity and what's important for them, and not just their own identity, but we're talking kind of wider system changes. So just really want to commend you for the great work that you're doing. Thank you for having me on today.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynn.
It's a pleasure.